Now, in this video, I want us to talk about offenses connected to murder. And there are various offenses connected to murder. The first offense is infanticide, covered under Section 210 of the Penal Code. Now, infanticide occurs where a mother kills her child under 12 months old while her balance of mind is disturbed due to childbirth or lactation. This is usually treated as manslaughter and not murder due to reduced mental responsibility. Now, there are various elements of infanticide where the prosecution must prove that number one, the accused is the mother, number two, the child is below 12 months, number three, death was caused by the mother, and number four, the mother's mental balance was disturbed and that the disturbance was linked to childbirth or lactation. Now, the penalty for infanticide is usually maximum life imprisonment. If you look at the case of Yoanina Namayaja versus Regiman, 1953, the facts of this particular case were that a mother killed an infant shortly after birth while suffering from mental disturbance caused by childbirth effects. And the issue was whether the standard of proof for disturbed mental balance equals that required for insanity. And the rule is that proof of disturbed mental balance in infanticide is lower than insanity defense threshold. And so the application of this case was that the court accepted the mental disturbance linked to childbirth without requiring the full insanity proof. And the conclusion of this case was that the conviction properly was treated as infanticide, that is manslaughter rather than murder. Now, the principle here to remember is that infanticide requires reduced mental balance and not insanity. Now, another offense connected to murder is threats to kill, and this is covered under Section 225 of the Penal Code. Now, threats to kill occur where a person, without lawful excuse, utters or communicates a threat to kill another, either directly or indirectly. Now, the threat may be oral, the threat may be written, or the threat may be communicated through a third party. Now, there are various elements of threats to kill where the prosecution must prove a number of things. Number one, they must prove that the threat was made. Secondly, it was a threat to kill. Number three, there was no lawful excuse. And number three, communication reached the victim either directly or indirectly. So that the penalty for threats to kill is maximum 10 years imprisonment. If you look at the case of Wilson Kaiga Gideon versus Republic, the facts of this particular case were that the accused wrote a letter to the district officer stating that either the complainant will kill him or he will kill the complainant over a land dispute. And the issue was whether indirect communication amounts to threat to kill. And the rule is that threat communicated through a third party still constitutes this particular offense. And the application of the case was that the district officer acted as an intermediary conveying the threat. The conclusion was that the conviction was actually upheld. Now, the legal principle you must always remember is that indirect threats are valid threats when it comes to law. Another offense connected to murder is suicide and related offenses. And the first type of suicide is attempted suicide. And this is covered under Section 226 of the Penal Code. Now, attempted suicide is simply attempting to take one's own life. The classification of attempted suicide is that it is treated as a misdemeanor. Now, the penalty for attempted suicide is covered under Section 36 of the Penal Code, so that the maximum penalty is 2 years imprisonment or a fine or both. Now, it is important to remember that nowadays, courts usually prefer treatment over punishment when it comes to attempted suicide. If you look at the case of Kabeni versus Republic of 1970, the facts of this particular case were that the accused was convicted and sentenced to 6 months imprisonment for attempted suicide. And the issue was whether imprisonment was an appropriate punishment. And the rule is that persons attempting suicide require sympathy and treatment rather than punishment. And the application of this particular case was that the court found imprisonment was excessive. The conclusion of this case was that the sentence was reduced and the accused was released immediately. So the principle to remember here is that courts should request for probation report before carrying out the sentencing. Another offense connected to murder is aiding attempted suicide. And this is covered under Section 225 of the Penal Code. And it occurs where a person procures, counsels, and assists another person to commit suicide. And examples involve giving a rope, providing poison, or advising on the most effective method of committing suicide. So that the penalty for aiding suicide is maximum life imprisonment. And this is usually more serious than attempted suicide itself. If you look at the case of Rex versus Kimonir and 5 others, the facts of this particular case were that the accused advised the victim, who was accused of witchcraft, to hang himself and gave him a rope. And so the issue was whether advising and supplying a rope amounts to aiding suicide. And the rule is that providing encouragement or providing tools amounts to aiding suicide. And the application of this particular case was that the victim acted on the advice and committed suicide. And the conclusion of the case was that the accused was convicted and imprisoned. So the legal principle you must always remember is that encouragement plus facilitation amounts to criminal liability. Another offense connected to murder is concealing birth, covered under Section 227 of the Penal Code. And concealing birth occurs where a person secretly disposes of a child's body to conceal its birth, so that it applies whether the child died before birth, whether the child died during birth, or died after birth. Now, there are various elements of concealing birth where the prosecution must prove a number of things. They must prove, number one, that the woman delivered the child, that the child was missing or body was hidden, and that disposal was intended to conceal birth. Now, remember, this applies even where murder cannot be proved. Now, the classification of concealing birth is a misdemeanor offense. Another offense connected to murder is killing an unborn child, covered under Section 228 of the Penal Code, and this one is also called child destruction. Now, it occurs where this child destruction occurs where the mother prevents the child from being born alive. That is when the child is capable of being born alive, and there is actually a distinction between abortion and child destruction. And the distinction is very clear, because when it comes to abortion, there is no need to prove that the child was viable. But when it comes to child destruction, there is actually need to prove that the child was actually viable. And medical evidence is usually required. Now, it is interesting to note that an accused charged with child destruction may still be convicted of abortion. Another offense connected to murder is assault, and this is covered under Section 250 to 253 of the Penal Code. And assault is simply intentional application of force, and the force could be direct or indirect. It includes, assault, which is a threat, and also battery, which is actual force. But you see, there is a difference between assault and and battery. And the difference between the two is very clear. You see, when it comes to assault, there is threat of force. But when it comes to battery, there is actual force. When it comes to assault, no contact is needed. But when it comes to battery, contact is required. Either the contact is direct or the contact is indirect. Now, there are various examples of battery, and they include a number of things. A good example is throwing a stone, throwing water, or hitting someone with an object. These amount to battery, but battery is not poisoning or infection transmission. In the case of Rex versus Gaturo, son of Njau, the facts of this particular case were that the accused raised and pointed a stick, threatening elders and demanded to kill the senior elder. And the issue was whether threatening gestures amount to assault. And the rule is that assault requires intention, it requires act, and it requires present ability to apply force. And so the application of this particular case was that raising a stick like a spear showed immediate threat capability. And the conclusion of this particular case was that the conduct amounted to assault. So the legal principle you must always remember in criminal law is that words alone are insufficient when it comes to assault. It must be a threatening act. Now, there are defenses to assault, and the first defense is lawful arrest. The second defense is surgical operation. The third defense is sporting activities. We have social conduct. We have self-defense. And we also have consensual sexual activity. Now, remember, provocation is not a defense in assault. If you look at the case of Menezes versus Republic of 1975, the facts of this particular case were that the accused knocked down a person he believed was attacking him with a knife. And the issue was whether the response was justified. And the rule is that reasonable defensive force is lawful against armed attacker. And the application of this particular case was that the accused reasonably feared danger. And the conclusion of this case was that force was justified. So the legal principle is that reasonable mistaken belief can actually support self-defense. Another offense connected to murder is aggravated assault. Now, this is assault causing actual bodily harm as covered under Section 251 of the Penal Code. Now, there are various elements of aggravated assault where the prosecution must prove a number of things. They must prove that, number one, assault occurred and that there was actual bodily harm caused. Examples include bruises, it includes swelling, it includes cuts. So that the penalty for aggravated assault is maximum 5 years imprisonment. Another offense is assault, resisting or obstructing police officer as covered under Section 253 of the Penal Code. And this includes, number one, assaulting a police officer on duty. And the requirement here is that the officer must be acting in execution of lawful duty. Another one is resisting lawful arrest. So that resistance is unlawful unless arrest itself is unlawful. If you look at the case of Rex versus Wakaba, son of Waithaka, the facts of this particular case were that the accused assaulted officers who were attempting arrest for illegal alcohol possession. And the issue was whether arrest was lawful. And the rule is that police officers must act within lawful authority. And the application of this case was that there was no evidence that the chief of the area prohibited possession of alcohol. And the conclusion of this case was that the arrest was unlawful, so that the accused was entitled to resist arrest using reasonable force. So the conviction was reduced to common assault. So the legal principle you must always remember is that unlawful arrest may be resisted reasonably. So here is a quick exam summary grid for offenses connected to murder. And this is going to help you, especially if you're a student. So remember, we've talked about offenses, we've talked about their section in the penal code, we've talked about their key feature and the penalty. The first offense we've talked about is infanticide, it's in section 210. The key feature is mother kills a child. It is under 12 months with disturbed mind, and the penalty is life imprisonment. We've also looked at threats to kill. It is under section 225 of the penal code, and the key feature is direct and indirect threat, and the penalty is 10 years. We've looked at attempted suicide, section 226 of the penal code. The key feature is attempt self-killing, and the penalty is 2 years imprisonment. We've looked at aiding suicide, section 225 of the penal code, and this is assisting suicide, and the penalty is life imprisonment. We've looked at concealing birth, section 227, and the key feature is hiding newborn baby, and the penalty is a misdemeanor. We've looked at killing an unborn child, section 228, and this is simply preventing viable birth, and the penalty is a serious felony. We've looked at assault, section 250 of the penal code. The key feature is threat of force, and the penalty varies. We've looked at battery, section 250 of the penal code. The key feature is actual force, and the penalty varies. We've also looked at ABH, that is actual bodily harm, section 251, and the key feature is assault causing injury, and the penalty varies. We've also looked at assaulting a police officer, which is under section 253 of the penal code, and the key feature is an officer on duty, and the penalty is, it is simply a serious offense. So that is all concerning offenses connected to murder. If it is your first time here, make sure to follow this channel and to subscribe for more legal lessons.